The morning rush at Central Station was like any other Tuesday. Thousands of people moved through the massive hall like a river, each person lost in their own world. Some checked their phones, others gulped down coffee, and many just stared ahead with tired eyes, thinking about the long workday ahead. In the middle of all this chaos, right near the east entrance, stood something unusual. A beautiful grand piano sat there, polished and gleaming under the station lights. It had been placed there 2 months ago as part of some city initiative to bring art to public spaces. The sign next to it read, "Play Me, I'm Yours," in fancy letters. Most people walked right past it. A few stopped to take photos. Occasionally, someone would sit down and play a simple tune, usually something everyone knew. But mostly, the piano just sat there waiting. That morning, a young girl stood about 20 feet away from the piano just watching it. She looked to be around 11 or 12 years old, though it was hard to tell. Her clothes were too big for her small frame, clearly hand-me-downs or from a donation bin. The jacket she wore had a torn pocket and several stains that wouldn't come out, no matter how many times it was washed. Her sneakers had holes in them and her socks didn't match. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, strands falling loose around her face. There was dirt on her cheeks and under her fingernails. She clutched a worn backpack that looked like it held everything she owned. To anyone passing by, she looked like just another street kid, probably homeless, definitely poor. But her eyes told a different story. As she stared at that piano, her eyes held something else entirely. They sparkled with a kind of hunger that went beyond food or shelter. It was the look of someone seeing something precious, something they desperately wanted but believed they could never have. She had been standing there for almost 15 minutes, just watching. A few times she took a step forward, then stopped herself. Her hands would move slightly, fingers twitching as if playing invisible keys. Then she would shake her head and look down at her dirty clothes, her confidence fading. An older woman in a business suit walked past, noticed the girl, and quickly moved her purse to the other side of her body. A man in jogging clothes gave her a suspicious look and picked up his pace. This was the city after all. People learned to be cautious, to keep their distance from those who looked like they might cause trouble or ask for money. The girl noticed these reactions. She was used to them. She knew how people saw her, knew that her appearance made them uncomfortable. It had been that way for a while now, and she had learned to make herself invisible most of the time. Stay quiet, keep your head down, don't draw attention. But that piano was calling to her. It had been calling to her for weeks. Every day she passed through this station, and every day she stopped to look at it. She remembered when things were different, when she could walk up to a piano without fear, when music was as natural to her as breathing. She took another step forward. Her heart was pounding now. The piano was so close, maybe 30 steps away. She could see the black and white keys, could almost feel them under her fingers. It had been so long since she had actually played a real piano. Too long. A businessman rushed past her, nearly knocking her over with his briefcase. He didn't apologize, didn't even look back. The girl steadied herself and wrapped her arms around her thin body. Maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe she should just leave. Come back tomorrow to look at it again from a distance, but her feet wouldn't move away. Instead, they carried her forward one small step at a time. She was close enough now to see the wood grain on the piano's surface, to notice a small scratch near the music stand. Her breathing quickened. A security guard on the other side of the hall glanced in her direction. He was a big man with a thick mustache and a radio clipped to his belt. His eyes narrowed as he watched the girl approach the expensive piano. His hand moved to his radio, ready to call it in if needed. Homeless kids and valuable public property didn't mix well in his experience. The girl reached the piano bench and stopped. She placed one trembling hand on its smooth surface. The wood was cool under her palm, real, solid, beautiful. She looked around nervously, half expecting someone to yell at her to get away. A group of college students walked by, laughing at something on one of their phones. They glanced at her and one of them elbowed his friend, pointing. They slowed down, curious to see what would happen. Would the dirty kid actually try to play? The girl swallowed hard. Every part of her wanted to sit down, to let her fingers touch those keys just once. But she also knew what would happen. People would stare. They would judge. They would laugh. Maybe the security guard would drag her away. Maybe someone would film it and put it online, and everyone would make fun of the homeless girl who thought she could play piano. Her eyes began to water. but she blinked the tears back. She had learned not to cry in public. Crying made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people either ignored you completely or called the authorities. She looked at her hands. They were small and dirty, nails broken from trying to survive on the streets. These hands didn't look like they belonged anywhere near such a beautiful instrument. But underneath the dirt, underneath the broken nails, these hands remembered. They remembered scales and arpeggios, remembered complex pieces that had taken months to learn, remembered the feel of keys responding to the perfect touch. More people were starting to notice her now. A woman with 2 small children pulled them closer, whispering something while looking at the girl. A man in an expensive coat shook his head in disapproval. 3 teenagers had their phones out, ready to capture whatever was about to happen. The security guard started walking in her direction, his heavy boots echoing on the marble floor. He had that look on his face, the one that said she was about to be asked to move along, to stop loitering, to go somewhere else. The girl felt all of this closing in around her. The stares, the judgment, the inevitable moment when she would be told she didn't belong here. Her whole body tensed up, ready to run like she had run so many times before. But then something changed inside her. Maybe it was because she had nothing left to lose. Maybe it was because the music inside her had been silent for too long, building up like water behind a dam ready to burst. Maybe it was simply because she was tired of being invisible, tired of letting the world tell her what she could and couldn't do. Her jaw set with determination, her shoulders straightened, and before anyone could stop her, before the security guard could reach her, before she could change her mind, she sat down on that piano bench and placed her dirty, trembling hands on those beautiful white keys. The crowd of onlookers grew larger. Someone laughed. Someone else said something cruel. Phones were held up, ready to record her failure. But the girl closed her eyes and took one deep breath. And in that moment, she wasn't a homeless kid in a train station anymore. She was a musician, about to share her gift with the world, whether the world wanted it or not. The security guard was now just 10 feet away, his radio already in his hand. He had dealt with situations like this before. Street kids touching expensive things rarely ended well. Usually they were just looking for attention or trying to cause a scene. His job was to keep order, to protect the station's property, and to make sure paying customers felt safe. "Hey kid," he called out, his voice firm but not quite angry yet. "You need to step away from there." The girl heard him, but she didn't move. Her hands stayed on the keys, frozen in place. For a second, it looked like she might actually listen, might stand up and walk away like she was supposed to, but then something flickered across her face. A kind of stubbornness mixed with sadness, mixed with something else that was hard to name. Behind the guard, more people had stopped to watch. The morning rush was still happening all around them, but a small crowd had formed in this corner of the station. Maybe 30 or 40 people now, all curious about what was happening with the dirty girl and the piano. One man in a sharp suit and polished shoes stepped forward. He looked like the type who was used to being listened to, probably someone important with an office in one of the tall buildings downtown. "Someone needs to do something about this," he said loudly, making sure others could hear him. "This is exactly what's wrong with this city. We can't have nice things anymore without people like her ruining them." A woman next to him nodded in agreement, pulling her designer handbag closer to her body. "It's disgraceful," she muttered. "Why isn't anyone stopping her?" The teenagers with their phones had moved closer now, forming a small semicircle. They were grinning, excited about the content they were about to capture. One of them had already started recording, her phone held up high to get the best angle. "This is gonna be epic," one boy whispered to his friend. "Watch her try to play. Bet she doesn't even know which keys to press." His friend laughed quietly. "Someone's gonna auto-tune this and make it into a meme by tonight. Poor kid has no idea what she's getting into." Another girl in their group felt a twinge of sympathy but said nothing. It was easier to go along with the group than to speak up. Besides, what could she do? The kid shouldn't be touching the piano anyway if she didn't know how to play. An elderly man with a cane shook his head sadly. He had seen the city change over the years, had watched as people became colder, more suspicious of each other. He wanted to say something in the girl's defense, but his voice didn't carry like it used to, and he doubted anyone would listen to him anyway. The security guard was almost at the piano now. "I'm not going to ask again," he said, his voice harder this time. "You need to move along now." The girl's eyes opened. She looked straight ahead at the piano keys. Not at the guard. Not at the crowd. Tears were running down her cheeks now, making clean streaks through the dirt on her face. But her expression wasn't one of fear or defeat. It was determination. "Just give me 1 minute," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, just 1 minute." The guard stopped, surprised that she had actually spoken. Most kids in her situation either ran or argued. This girl just asked for 1 minute, and there was something in her voice that made him hesitate. But the man in the expensive suit wasn't having it. "Are you kidding me right now?" he shouted. "Guard, do your job. Get her away from there before she breaks something." The woman with the handbag chimed in. "She probably doesn't even wash her hands. That piano is for everyone to use, and now it's going to be filthy." Someone else in the crowd laughed at that. A few others joined in. The laughter spread like a wave, and suddenly the whole thing felt like entertainment. The morning commute was usually so boring, so predictable. This was at least something different to look at, to talk about later at the office. The girl heard every word. She heard the laughter, felt the judgment washing over her like cold water. She had known this would happen, had prepared herself for it. But knowing something and experiencing it were two different things. Each laugh felt like a small cut, each whispered insult like a tiny wound. Her hand started to shake on the keys. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should just stand up, apologize, and disappear back into the crowd where she belonged, back to being invisible, back to being no one. The security guard reached for her shoulder, ready to escort her away. "Come on, kid. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." But then something happened. Maybe it was the weight of all those stares, all that mockery. Maybe it was the memory of better days when she was allowed to make music without fear. Maybe it was simply that she had reached a point where she had nothing left to lose. Whatever it was, it made her take a deep breath and straighten her back. Her hands stopped shaking. She adjusted her position on the bench, her feet finding their place even though they barely reached the pedals. And then, before anyone could pull her away, before she could change her mind, her fingers pressed down on the keys. The first notes rang out clear and pure through the station hall. Not random notes, not the fumbling sounds of someone who didn't know what they were doing. Actual music. The opening measures of one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written. The laughter stopped abruptly like someone had hit a pause button. The security guard's hand froze in midair. The man in the expensive suit's mouth fell open. The teenagers stopped recording, then quickly started again, realizing they might actually be capturing something worth watching. The girl's fingers began to move faster now, dancing across the keys with impossible grace. Her small hands stretched to reach chords that seemed too wide, but somehow she managed. The music grew in complexity, each note perfect, each phrase flowing into the next like water. People in the crowd looked at each other in confusion. This wasn't possible. This dirty street kid couldn't be playing like this. There had to be a trick, maybe a recording playing somewhere. But no, they could clearly see her fingers moving, could see the keys going down, could hear the music coming directly from the piano. The elderly man with the cane smiled slowly, his eyes filling with tears. He knew real talent when he heard it. This was the genuine article, the kind of gift that came along once in a generation. The security guard lowered his hand and took a step back. He had been ready to remove her by force if necessary, but now he couldn't bring himself to interrupt. His radio hung forgotten at his side. More people were stopping now. Business people on their way to important meetings, students rushing to class, parents with children. They all stopped, drawn by the music that filled every corner of the massive station hall. The man in the expensive suit looked pale, his earlier confidence shaken. The woman with the designer bag had gone quiet, her face flushing with something that might have been shame. The teenagers had stopped grinning, their expressions shifting to something like awe. The girl played on, completely lost in the music now. Her eyes were closed again, her whole body swaying slightly with the rhythm. This was who she really was, underneath the dirt and the torn clothes and the hard life on the streets. This was her truth, and she was sharing it with everyone whether they wanted to hear it or not. The piece she was playing built and built, growing more intense with each passing moment. Her fingers flew across the keys so fast they were almost a blur. The music soared up to the high ceiling and bounced back down, surrounding everyone in the station with its beauty. And in that moment, something shifted in the crowd. The mockery was gone, replaced by stunned silence. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't judging. They were simply listening, unable to look away from the impossible scene unfolding before them. The station had become a concert hall. Hundreds of people had stopped now, creating a massive semicircle around the piano. The usual sounds of the busy morning rush, the announcements over the loudspeaker, the rumble of trains, all of it faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was the music pouring from that piano and the small girl creating it. Her fingers moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone her age. But it wasn't just technical skill. There was emotion in every note, a depth of feeling that reached into the chest of everyone listening and squeezed their hearts. Some people in the crowd felt tears running down their faces without even realizing it. A mother holding a baby found herself swaying gently, the infant quiet and calm in her arms, somehow soothed by the music. A construction worker, still wearing his hard hat and dusty work clothes, stood with his mouth open, his lunch forgotten in his hands. Two police officers, who had been called to check out the commotion, stood at the edge of the crowd, making no move to intervene. The music built to a crescendo, the girl's whole body involved now, leaning into the difficult passages, her face showing the intensity of what she was creating. Her fingers crashed down on the lower keys, creating deep, resonant notes that vibrated through the floor. Then they flew back up to the higher register, producing sounds so delicate and pure they seemed to shimmer in the air. The businessman who had complained so loudly earlier stood frozen, his briefcase dangling from his hand. His face had gone from angry red to pale white. He looked like someone who had just realized he had made a terrible mistake, but didn't know how to fix it. The teenage girl who had been filming lowered her phone slightly. She wasn't thinking about views or likes anymore. She was just watching, transfixed by what was happening. Next to her, one of the boys wiped his eyes quickly, hoping no one noticed. An older woman in the crowd gasped and grabbed her husband's arm. "Richard," she whispered urgently. "Richard, do you hear this? This is Rachmaninoff, the second concerto. I couldn't even play this when I was studying at the conservatory." Her husband, a retired music teacher, nodded slowly. His hands were shaking. "I know," he said quietly. "I know what it is, but how? How is this possible?" The girl played on, unaware of the questions, the confusion, the growing realization spreading through the crowd. She was somewhere else entirely, lost in the world the music created. Her eyes remained closed, her expression peaceful now despite the complexity of what her hands were doing. The piece moved into a softer section, and the girl's touch became gentle, almost hesitant. The notes fell like raindrops, each one clear and separate. People leaned forward, not wanting to miss a single sound. Someone's phone rang in the crowd, and 3 people immediately shushed the person, glaring until they silenced it. The security guard had tears streaming down his face. He felt ashamed of how he had approached her, how ready he had been to drag her away. He thought about his own daughter at home, about the piano lessons she complained about every week. This girl, this homeless kid he had been about to remove by force, had more talent in her smallest finger than most people developed in a lifetime. A well-dressed woman near the front pulled out her phone, but not to record. She was searching for something, her fingers moving frantically across the screen. Her face grew more confused with each second. She showed her screen to the person next to her, whispering something urgent. The music swelled again, growing in power and intensity. The girl's hands moved in wide arcs, reaching across the entire keyboard. The melody soared and dipped, twisted and turned, taking the listeners on a journey they hadn't asked for but couldn't escape from. Some people had closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others watched the girl's hands, trying to understand how such small fingers could create such enormous sound. A young man in medical scrubs, clearly on his way to or from a shift at the hospital, had tears running into his surgical mask. He had been running on empty for days, exhausted from long hours and difficult cases. But this music, this unexpected moment of beauty in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, was filling up something inside him that had been hollow for too long. The elderly man with the cane had sat down on a nearby bench, overwhelmed. He remembered his own youth when he had dreamed of being a concert pianist. Life had taken him in different directions, but the love of music had never left him. Watching this girl, seeing such pure talent shine through despite her circumstances, felt like watching a miracle unfold. The woman who had been searching on her phone suddenly gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She turned to the retired music teacher and his wife, her eyes wide with recognition. "I think I know who this is," she said, her voice shaking. I think I know who she is. But her words were lost in the music. The piece was building toward its dramatic conclusion, and the girl was giving it everything she had. Her small frame shook with the effort, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool station air. Her fingers flew across the keys in patterns so complex they seemed almost superhuman. The crowd had grown to several hundred people now. The station manager had appeared, alerted by his staff about the situation. He had come prepared to shut this down, to restore order and get people moving again. But when he heard the music, when he saw what was happening, he stopped in his tracks. All thoughts of rules and regulations disappeared. He simply stood there and listened like everyone else. A group of college music students had pushed their way to the front. They stood in a cluster, their faces showing a mixture of disbelief and envy and pure admiration. One of them was crying openly, not bothering to hide it. "We've been studying for years," she whispered to her friend. "Years of practice, private lessons, expensive teachers. And this girl who looks like she's been living on the streets is playing circles around all of us." Her friend nodded, unable to speak. They had both seen talented musicians before. Their university had several prodigies, students who had been playing since they were old enough to reach the keys. But this was different. This wasn't just talent or training. This was something else entirely, something rare and precious that couldn't be taught or bought. The music reached its final climax. The girl's hands came crashing down on the keys with tremendous force, creating a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very air. Then slowly, carefully, she played the final notes, soft now, gentle like a whisper after a storm. The music grew quieter and quieter until finally her hands lifted off the keys. Silence filled the station, complete total silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The girl sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes still closed. She looked exhausted, drained, but also peaceful, like she had just shared something deeply personal and was waiting to see how the world would respond. For 5 long seconds, nothing happened. The crowd stood frozen, still processing what they had just witnessed. Some people looked stunned, others confused, many were crying openly now. Then it started. One person began clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire crowd erupted in thunderous applause. The sound was deafening, echoing off the high ceilings and marble floors. People were cheering, whistling, stomping their feet. Some were shouting, "Bravo!" at the top of their lungs. The girl's eyes flew open, startled by the noise. She looked around in confusion, as if waking from a dream. She saw the massive crowd, saw the tears and the smiles and the phones held high recording her. For a moment she looked terrified, like she might run. But then she saw their faces, really saw them. These people weren't mocking her anymore. They weren't judging her dirty clothes or her messy hair. They were looking at her with respect, with admiration, with something that looked almost like love. The businessman who had called for her removal was clapping so hard his hands were turning red. The woman with the designer bag had her hand over her heart, her own eyes filled with tears. The teenagers were cheering and shouting, their earlier cruelty forgotten or perhaps regretted. The security guard walked forward slowly. When he reached the piano, he did something unexpected. He bowed to her, a deep, respectful bow. Then he began clapping again, looking directly at the girl with an expression that asked for forgiveness without words. The applause continued, growing louder if anything. More people kept joining the crowd, drawn by the noise, asking what had happened, being told they had just missed something incredible. The girl sat on the bench, overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face again. But these were different tears. Not tears of fear or sadness, but something else entirely. The applause slowly began to fade, but the crowd remained. Nobody wanted to leave, as if afraid that moving might break whatever spell had been cast over this corner of the station. The girl sat at the piano, her small hand still resting on her lap, looking uncertain about what to do next. The woman who had been searching on her phone pushed through the crowd, moving with urgency. She was in her 50s, dressed professionally with glasses perched on her nose. When she reached the piano, she stopped suddenly, her hand covering her mouth as she got a closer look at the girl's face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It really is you." The girl looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. She didn't recognize this woman, didn't know why she was staring at her like that. For a moment, the old instinct to run kicked in, but the crowd was too thick now, and her legs felt too weak to carry her anyway. The woman pulled out her phone again, her hands shaking as she scrolled through old news articles. She found what she was looking for and held the phone up, Comparing the image on the screen to the girl's face, the article was 3 years old, and the photo showed a younger version of the same girl, cleaner and healthier looking but unmistakably the same person. The headline read, 9-year-old piano prodigy stuns audience at national competition. "You're Lily Chen," the woman said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You won the junior national piano competition 3 years ago. I was there. I watched you play. You were extraordinary then, but this, what you just played now, was even more incredible." A murmur ran through the crowd. People pulled out their own phones, searching for the name. Within seconds, dozens of people were reading old articles, watching old videos of a young Lily Chen performing at various competitions and recitals. The videos showed a confident, well-dressed child playing for packed concert halls, her mother always visible in the background, beaming with pride. The retired music teacher and his wife pushed closer. "I remember you," the wife said softly. "Your mother was a piano teacher, wasn't she? She taught at the conservatory. I met her once at a conference. She was so proud of you." At the mention of her mother, Lily's face crumpled. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, and she wrapped her arms around herself tightly. The woman who had recognized her knelt down beside the piano bench, her professional demeanor giving way to pure compassion. "What happened to you?" she asked gently. "Where's your mother?" Lily couldn't speak. Her throat felt too tight, the words trapped inside. But the crowd had already found the answer. Someone had discovered a second article, this one from 2.5 years ago. The headline made people gasp. "Local piano teacher dies in car accident, leaves behind daughter." The pieces started falling into place. People read through the articles, learning the story that Lily couldn't tell them herself. Her mother had been her only parent, her teacher, her entire world. After the accident, Lily had been placed in foster care, but the system had failed her as it failed so many children. She had bounced from home to home, each one worse than the last. Some families only wanted the monthly check. Others had too many kids already and couldn't give her the attention she needed. One article mentioned that she had run away from her 4th foster home 8 months ago and hadn't been seen since. The authorities had looked for her, but in a big city, one runaway kid was easy to lose in the crowd. She had become another statistic, another lost child falling through the cracks. The security guard was reading over someone's shoulder, his face growing paler with each paragraph. He thought about how close he had come to dragging her away, to treating her like a troublemaker instead of a traumatized child who had lost everything. "Where have you been living?" the woman asked Lily, though she already feared the answer. Lily finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. "Wherever I can. Sometimes the shelter on 5th Street. Sometimes the church basement when it's really cold. Sometimes just outside in the park or under bridges." The crowd was silent now, the earlier excitement replaced by a heavy sadness. They thought about their own comfortable homes, their own children safe and warm in their beds. They thought about this gifted child sleeping under bridges, her extraordinary talent buried under the daily struggle to survive. A man in the crowd stepped forward. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with white hair and kind eyes. "I'm the director of the Metropolitan Conservatory," he said. "Your mother used to work for us. We've been looking for you, Lily. When you disappeared, we tried to find you, but you were already gone." Lily looked at him with recognition dawning in her eyes. She remembered him from before, from when life was normal. He used to give her candy when she came to the conservatory with her mother. "We never stopped looking," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother was family to us. You are family to us. We should have done more. We should have fought harder to keep you." The woman who first recognized Lily stood up and addressed the crowd. "This child is one of the most gifted musicians of her generation. 3 years ago, judges said she had the potential to be one of the greatest pianists of our time. And instead of nurturing that gift, instead of protecting her, we let her slip away. We let her live on the streets while we went about our comfortable lives." Her words hit hard. The businessman who had complained about Lily touching the piano felt sick to his stomach. He thought about his own children, about how he would move heaven and earth to protect them. Yet he had been ready to have this child removed like garbage simply because her clothes were dirty. The teenagers who had filmed her with mockery in their hearts looked at each other uncomfortably. The video they had started recording as a joke had captured something else entirely. They had documented both the cruelty of the crowd and the triumph of an incredible talent. One of them spoke up, his voice uncertain. "I recorded the whole thing. Should I delete it?" The conservatory director shook his head. No, keep it, share it. The world needs to see this, not to shame anyone, but to remember. To remember that genius and beauty can exist anywhere in anyone, and we have a responsibility to nurture it, not destroy it. People in the crowd were already posting their videos and photos online. The story was spreading at lightning speed. Within minutes, the hashtag Piano Girl was trending. News stations were picking up the story. Journalists were racing to the station. A woman who had been standing near the back stepped forward. She was a child psychologist who worked with foster children. "Lily, I want to help you," she said. "There are people here who want to help you. But first you need immediate care. When was the last time you ate?" Lily thought about it. "Yesterday morning. A lady at the church gave me half a sandwich." The crowd reacted with audible gasps. The mother with the baby immediately started digging through her bag, pulling out snacks and a bottle of juice. Others followed suit, offering whatever food they had. Within seconds, Lily was surrounded by granola bars, fruit, sandwiches, bottles of water. The station manager, who had been watching all of this unfold, made a decision. He pulled out his radio and spoke into it quietly. Minutes later, staff members appeared with a first aid kit, blankets, and food from the station restaurants. They had orders to give Lily whatever she needed, free of charge. The police officers who had been standing at the edge of the crowd came forward. But they weren't there to arrest anyone or disperse the crowd. One of them knelt down to Lily's level. "We're not here to take you anywhere you don't want to go," he said gently. "But we need to make sure you're safe. Will you let us help you?" Lily looked around at all these faces, these strangers who minutes ago had been mocking her or ignoring her. Now they looked at her with concern, with respect, with something that felt almost like love. It was overwhelming, confusing, and terrifying all at once. The conservatory director spoke again. "Lily, I know you've been through more than any child should have to endure. I know trusting adults hasn't worked out well for you. But I'm making you a promise right here, in front of all these witnesses. The conservatory will take responsibility for you. We'll make sure you have a safe place to live, food to eat, and the chance to play music again if you want to. Your mother was part of our family, which makes you part of our family. We failed you once. We won't fail you again." Lily looked at the piano keys, running her fingers gently across them one more time. She thought about her mother, about the countless hours they had spent together at pianos like this one. She thought about the music that lived inside her, the gift her mother had helped her develop and that had somehow survived even the worst days on the streets. "Will I have to leave the piano?" she asked quietly. The director smiled through his tears. "No, sweetheart. You'll never have to leave the piano again. I promise you that." For the first time in a very long time, something that might have been hope flickered across Lily's face. It was fragile, uncertain, like a candle flame in the wind, but it was there. The crowd watched in silence as the conservatory director gently helped Lily stand up from the piano bench. Someone draped a clean jacket over her shoulders. Someone else handed her a bottle of water. The psychologist stayed close, ready to intervene if Lily showed signs of panic or tried to run. But Lily didn't run. She took the water, drank it slowly, and let the adults around her figure out what came next. She was tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of fighting every single day just to survive. As they prepared to leave the station, to take Lily somewhere safe where she could rest and eat and begin the long process of healing, the crowd parted to make way, and as she walked through, something remarkable happened. People started applauding again, not the thunderous applause from before, but something softer, more respectful. A recognition not just of her talent, but of her courage, her survival, her refusal to let the world break her spirit completely. Lily looked back at the piano one last time before leaving the station. It sat there under the lights, waiting for the next person to play it. But it would never forget the homeless girl who had sat down that Tuesday morning and reminded everyone what really mattered. 6 months had passed since that morning at the station. The video of Lily's performance had been viewed over 50 million times. News outlets from around the world had covered her story. But for Lily herself, the real change had nothing to do with fame or viral videos. It was quieter than that, more personal. She lived now in a small apartment connected to the conservatory, looked after by Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired music teacher who had volunteered to become her guardian. The apartment was nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a little kitchen, but to Lily it felt like a palace. She had her own room, her own bed with clean sheets and a closet full of clothes that actually fit her. Simple things that most kids took for granted felt like miracles to her. But the best part, the part that made her heart sing every single day, was the piano. A beautiful upright piano sat in the corner of the living room, and Lily was allowed to play it whenever she wanted. Sometimes she woke up at 5 in the morning and played for hours. Other times she came home from school and went straight to the piano, losing herself in the music until Mrs. Rodriguez called her for dinner. School had been hard at first. The other kids knew who she was, had seen the videos, and some of them treated her like a celebrity while others whispered behind her hands. But Lily was learning to ignore the attention and focus on what mattered. She was catching up on the education she had missed during her time on the streets. Math was difficult and history confused her sometimes, but she was trying. Mrs. Rodriguez helped her every evening, patient and kind even when Lily got frustrated. The conservatory had welcomed her back with open arms. The director had kept his promise. Lily took lessons 3 times a week with some of the best piano teachers in the country. They marveled at how she had retained her skills despite years without proper practice. If anything, her playing had become more emotional, more mature. The hardship she had endured had given her music a depth that most young musicians couldn't achieve. Today was special, though. Today was the day that would change everything again, but in a good way this time. Lily stood backstage at the city's most prestigious concert hall, wearing a deep blue dress that Mrs. Rodriguez had helped her pick out. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and for the first time in years she looked like the child prodigy from those old photographs. Except her eyes were different now. They carried a weight, a knowledge of how cruel and how kind the world could be. Her hands were shaking. In 30 minutes she would walk out onto that stage and perform with the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of debut that most young pianists could only dream about. But Lily was terrified. Mrs. Rodriguez stood beside her, gently rubbing her back. "You can do this, Mija," she said softly. "You've already done the hardest thing. You survived. Playing the piano is the easy part." The stage manager appeared, wearing a headset and carrying a clipboard. "5 minutes, Lily, are you ready?" Lily wasn't sure she was ready. Her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies. Her palms were sweaty. What if she forgot the notes? What if she disappointed everyone? What if the audience realized she didn't belong on this stage after all? Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the audience filing into their seats. The concert hall was enormous, with 3 levels of balconies rising up toward an ornate ceiling. Every seat was filled. Over 2,000 people had come to see her play. She recognized some faces from the station, people who had been there that morning. The security guard was there with his family. The teenage girl who had filmed her sat in the front row with her parents. Even the businessman who had complained was there, looking nervous and excited. In a special box seat reserved for honored guests, sat the conservatory director, surrounded by board members and major donors. Next to them were journalists from major newspapers and magazines. This concert was being recorded for a documentary about Lily's journey from homelessness to this moment, but Lily's eyes found other faces that mattered more. The elderly man with the cane who had smiled at her that day sat in the orchestra section, his wife beside him. The construction worker in his Sunday best, looking uncomfortable in a tie but grinning from ear to ear. The mother with the baby who was now old enough to sit quietly and watch. All these ordinary people who had witnessed something extraordinary and wanted to see what came next. The lights in the concert hall dimmed. The audience settled into their seats, a hush falling over the crowd. The orchestra members were already in position, their instruments ready. The conductor, a renowned maestro who had flown in specifically for this performance, stood waiting at his podium. The stage manager touched Lily's shoulder gently. "It's time." Lily took a deep breath. She thought about her mother, wondered if somehow she could see this moment. She thought about all the cold nights sleeping under bridges, all the times she thought she would never play piano again. She thought about that public piano in the station, and the courage it had taken to sit down and play despite knowing people would judge her. Mrs. Rodriguez gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Your mama would be so proud of you. I'm proud of you. Now go out there and show them what you're made of." Lily walked onto the stage. The spotlight hit her, warm and bright. The audience erupted in applause before she had even reached the piano. She stopped, surprised, and turned to face them. All these people standing and clapping for her, Not because she had played yet, but simply because she had made it here, because she had survived and was still creating beauty despite everything. She bowed slightly the way Mrs. Rodriguez had taught her and walked to the piano. The orchestra's grand piano was magnificent, far nicer than anything she had played in recent months. She adjusted the bench, positioned her feet, and placed her hands on the keys. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra lifted their instruments, and in that moment before the music began, Lily felt something shift inside her. The nervousness didn't disappear entirely, but it transformed into something else. Excitement, joy, a sense of being exactly where she was supposed to be. The conductor's baton came down. The orchestra began to play the opening measures. And then it was Lily's turn. Her fingers touched the keys and the fear melted away completely. This was home. This was where she belonged. Not because of the fancy concert hall or the expensive piano or the important people in the audience, but because music was part of who she was, woven into her soul so deeply that nothing could take it away. She played the concerto with everything she had, every emotion, every memory, every ounce of pain and hope and love. The orchestra followed her lead, the musicians mesmerized by the 12-year-old soloist who played with the maturity of someone who had lived several lifetimes. The conductor had tears streaming down his face as he led them through the piece. In the audience, people were experiencing something rare and precious. They weren't just hearing music. They were witnessing the triumph of the human spirit, the proof that talent and beauty could survive even in the darkest circumstances. Many of them thought about their own lives, their own struggles, and found hope in this young girl's journey. The businessman who had wanted her removed from the station piano sat with his head in his hands, overcome with emotion. He had started a scholarship fund for homeless children after that day, trying to make amends for his initial cruelty. Watching Lily now, he felt grateful that he had been wrong, that she had played anyway, that she had shown him what really mattered. The teenage girl who had filmed her had become an advocate for foster children, using her social media following to raise awareness. She had learned something important that day about judging people by their appearance, about cruelty and compassion, about second chances. The security guard had started volunteering at the homeless shelter where Lily used to stay. He brought his daughter with him, teaching her about empathy and kindness. He never forgot how close he had come to stopping something beautiful from happening. The music built to its final climax. Lily's hands flew across the keys one last time, the orchestra surging behind her in a wave of sound that filled every corner of the concert hall. And then, with perfect precision, she played the final note. Her hands lifted from the keys and silence filled the space for one breathless moment. Then the audience exploded. People leaped to their feet, applauding so hard their hands hurt. The noise was deafening, a roar of approval and love and celebration. Orchestra members were tapping their music stands with their bows, a sign of respect usually reserved for the greatest performances. The conductor set down his baton and began clapping too, turning to Lily with a huge smile on his face. Lily stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. She looked out at all those faces, all those people who believed in her, who had given her a second chance. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that public piano in the train station to this moment of triumph. Mrs. Rodriguez was crying in the wings, her hands clasped over her heart. The conservatory director was on his feet applauding, looking vindicated in his decision to bring Lily back into the fold. But most importantly, in Lily's own heart, something had healed. Not completely, perhaps. The pain of losing her mother would never fully go away. But she had found her way back to the music, back to herself. As the applause continued, Lily realized something important. That moment at the train station, when people had mocked her and she had played anyway, hadn't just changed her life. It had changed theirs too. The video had inspired countless other people facing their own struggles. She received letters every week from people telling her that her story had given them hope, had reminded them not to give up on their dreams. The girl who had been derided for touching the piano had indeed dumbfounded everyone. But more than that, she had reminded the world of something essential. That every person has value, regardless of how they look or where they come from. That talent can bloom in the most unlikely places. That kindness matters more than judgment. And that sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything. Lily bowed one more time and walked off the stage, her heart full. She had a home now, people who loved her, and the freedom to make music every single day. She had survived the worst and come out the other side stronger. And while the journey had been painful, standing here now, hearing that applause, she wouldn't change a thing. Because every note she played carried the weight of that journey. Every performance was a testament to survival, to hope, to the unbreakable human spirit. She was more than just a talented pianist. She was living proof that no matter how dark things get, there is always a chance for a new beginning. The curtain fell, but for Lily Chen, this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of a beautiful new chapter,